Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Eugene Stefanov. I'm part of the marketing team at Perficient, and I'm very excited that you joined us for today's webinar, in which we'll discuss how to automate medical coding with WHODrug Koda. Before we move on to a brief overview of Perficient, I'd like to cover some basic housekeeping items. All participants on this call are in listen-only mode, which means that everyone is on mute. You are welcome to submit questions to our speakers at any time today. They will be addressed as time allows toward the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar, feel free to contact our speakers directly. Their contact information will be made available in the presentation. You can also fill out the Contact Us form found on Perficient and UMC's websites. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you within several days. All right, a little bit about Perficient. So Perficient is a leading global digital consultancy. We imagine, create, engineer, and run digital transformation solutions that help our clients exceed customer expectations, outpace competition, and grow their business. With unparalleled strategy, creative, and technology capabilities, we bring big thinking and innovative ideas, along with a practical approach to help the world's largest enterprises and biggest brands succeed. We have a broad network of locations across the US, as well as near-shore and offshore facilities in India, China, Colombia, Mexico, and Serbia. We were founded in 1997, and we're a public company with approximately 4,500 employees. We've formed strategic partnerships with each of the major technology vendors and also have dedicated solution and industry practices. So one of these practices is, of course, life sciences. This slide shows our depth of experience. You can see that we have relationships with over 30 of the world's largest public life sciences companies. And at this point, I think I've covered all the housekeeping items and would love to turn the call over to today's speakers, Kaz Halsley and Damon Fahimi.
Thank you, Eugene. So this is Kaz Halsley. Thanks everyone for joining this webinar today. I'm a director in the Life Sciences Business Unit at Perficient. I've been in the industry around 20 years in various roles, including clinical data management, project and program management, process design and system implementation, and also computer system validation. I spent the past few years focused on medical coding processes and systems. And I'm here today to describe how you could potentially integrate the UMC's WHODrug Koda coding engine into your coding process via its web service API. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Damon Fahimi from the UMC to discuss this.
Hi all, and thank you, Kaz. My name is Damon Fahimi. And I am working at the UMC as a product manager for WHODrug. I've been with the UMC now for about 8 years plus. I am, as I said, working as a product manager. So for example, I'm overseeing WHODrug Koda. So I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you to Perficient for inviting me. And I'm looking forward to today and all the questions that you might have and discussing this topic with you all. Kaz, back to you.
Thank you. So Damon is going to introduce WHODrug Global and drug coding in general, which I'm sure many of you on the call are very familiar with, but then go into more detail about WHODrug Koda itself, this UMC coding engine. And then I'll talk about some of the reasons why you might want to use Koda, some methods for using it. I'll describe the interface prototype that some of my colleagues have been working on and some various use cases for the potential use of that interface. and then we'll talk about how you can find out more. And of course, we're more than happy to answer any questions that you may have. As Eugene said at the beginning, please just type those into the questions window and we'd be happy to answer those at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Cass. So just as Cass said, I'd like to start us off by giving you all some background on who we, the UMC, are and what WHODrug Global is. And again, just as Cass explained, this might be old news to quite a few of you, but still I think it's important before digging into Koda that we are all on the same page when it comes to drug coding. And after our presentations, we'll both be here for questions. So please use the questions log for that, as previously explained as well. But now, again, to get everyone on the same page, I wanted to start us off with some basic information on who we, the UMC, are. So let's take it from the very, very beginning. UMC, or Uppsala Monitoring Centre, was established in 1978 to support the WHO, that is the World Health Organization, program for international drug monitoring. And since this point, really, we've been working as a WHO collaborating center from our offices in Uppsala, Sweden. Of course, these days we're all still working from home, at least in Sweden. And Uppsala is actually my hometown as well, so I feel very home here. The UMC, we have a vision of a world where all patients and also healthcare professionals make wise therapeutic decisions in their use of medicines. And our mission is basically to achieve this by working with and promoting pharmacovigilance on a global level. We are doing that in multiple of different ways, but given the scope of today's presentation, I would like to draw your attention to, of course, WHODrug Global, which is something that we at the UMC have developed and are actively maintaining today. So most of you are quite familiar with WHODrug Global, but basically it is a drug dictionary that is being used for drug coding in both post-marketing safety settings and also pre-marketing clinical trials. And today, use of WHODrug Global is actually mandated by a number of regulatory authorities worldwide. Before we start to talk about today's star, WHODrug Koda, I think it's really important that we all have the same understanding of the most significant challenges in regards to drug coding. So on these slides, you will find some of the key challenges as reported by WHODrug users when we've been talking to them. So first of all, drug coding requires highly trained staff, not only within the field of medical coding, but also specifically when it comes to internal coding conventions. What's more, the volumes of drug data to handle is constantly getting more and more. So did you, for example, know that the number of unique clinical trials studies grew with around 90% between 2010 and 2019? Of course, this leads to more drug data to code as well. To top it off, we also need to have a scalable process so that we can handle temporary peaks of data to code, often with tight deadlines as well. To be able to make most use of the coded data, of course, both coding quality and consistency is really, really important for us. So how do we, for example, make sure that everyone within a coding team all codes the same? Finally, we have come to understand that the available supportive tools and processes out there, such as, for example, synonym list and existing autoencoders, do not always fulfill user needs and take a lot of time to figure out, maintain, and, for example, in the case of synonym lists, also version. So with all of this in our minds, we've asked ourselves, so what could a UMC do here? Could a UMC potentially step in and do something that could facilitate the drug coding process, specifically thinking about coding efficiency and consistency and making use of technology and WHODrug know-how? So a couple of years ago, we started to ask ourselves, what role do we at UMC have to play here? What if all drug coding staff could spend their time only on the most relevant cases instead of coding a lot of manual things that could be automated potentially? What if some parts of the drug coding could be automated, thereby help cope with these short and long-term peaks that we've seen? And what if UMC could gather know-how from WHODrug users with the help of technology and WHODrug know-how increase the drug coding consistency? And what if there was a plugin that would work with current processes and tools, so you don't need something brand new and switch all your coding tools and related processes. You could just take something and use it as a plugin. So based on all of this, we kind of said that, well, maybe we can't just be an organization that keep providing WHODrug Global and leave all the challenges that is pertaining to the drug coding itself to our users. Don't we have a responsibility to also make sure that we facilitate the drug coding process itself? We also realized that we actually have unique insights on WHODrug Global, as we are the maintenance organizations, and also we have connections with expert WHODrug users all around the world. So based on all of this, we initiated a project in which we wanted to explore if we, with the help of machines, could find an intelligent approach to automating drug coding while still using the human brain when needed. And this was something that evolved, and I'm actually really glad that we, after spending very much time discussing this internally and with reference WHODrug users worldwide, were able to make something available to WHODrug users in March 2019. That is more than a year ago now. And this was something that we called WHODrug Koda. So basically, Koda feeds on raw drug information that is normally collected in both drug safety and in clinical trials, namely the drug verbatim, route, and indication. None of this information needs to be pre-coded, which is something that is really important to know and is actually one of the most frequently asked questions that we get. So it's just the information as collected on, for example, a CRF. So what does WHODrug Koda spit out? Well, actually, drug coding can be divided into two different parts. We have the drug name coding and the ATC selection, if there are more ATC codes assigned to a specific drug name. And what WHODrug Koda spits out is, of course, both the drug names and also the selected ATC code based on the raw data. And I would also like to say that ATC selection is actually something that is getting more and more traction from the regulators. And there is actually, for example, a recommendation issued by the FDA to do ATC selection when you submit ConMeds to the FDA. And please note that coding is actually performed even if indication or route, or actually both, are missing. But of course, the performance and precision is much higher if you have all these three pieces of information, as it would be for a manual coder. This is a screenshot from WHODrug Koda web application, which we will talk about in a few more minutes. But basically, this slide shows you exactly the same information as on the previous slide. You have the input data on your left-hand side, and you have the output data, the coded data, on your right-hand side. And WHODrug Koda performs drug coding on 2 confidence levels. So whenever WHODrug Koda is really sure, we call that high certainty predictions. And then the output data has normal background colors. When WHODrug Koda is providing lower certainty predictions, which means that you might want to have a manual check on this, then there will be a yellowish background color as seen in these examples. On the next few slides, I will try to describe how WHODrug Koda can do all of this. And this is something that I could and would like to spend a few hours talking about, but I'll try to condense it a bit for you today. So please bear with me. From the very beginning, we were kind of sure that that appropriate use of the latest technology would be a crucial factor for us to do this in a good way. And we therefore looked into artificial intelligence and machine learning, basically from day one when we started to look at this. In the end, we made use of a supervised machine learning model. And basically, this is a classification algorithm used to assign observation to a discrete set of classes. We provided the model with a lot of training data, which I will talk about in a minute or two, and because it's really crucial. And this is how we were able to basically teach the machine learning model how to perform the task we wanted to learn. And eventually the idea is that the model should be able to deal with data that it's never seen before and make the correct prediction, of course. An interesting aspect is that the machine learning model is actually most applied when it comes to WHODrug Koda for the ATC selection part. And the reason for that is that the number of so-called classes available for drug name coding is as many as there exists drug name. That is nearly half, or actually over now, 500,000 of drug names. The number of classes of ATC codes is much more suitable for machine learning model with around 1,400 classes. With that said, we did actually also use machine learning for the drug name coding as well, but then as one component out of many others, which I will describe in a minute as well. So how were we able to teach our friend Koda here to perform drug coding in a good way? Well, something that we kind of quickly identified as well is that training of the model is absolute key. And we were extremely fortunate here in that we could make use of something called Wikibase. So Wikibase is a World Health Organization global database consisting of ICSRs from basically all over the world. And this is something that is maintained and coordinated by the UMC today. Within Wikibase, there are millions and millions of unique combinations of verbatim, route, and indication. And what's more, the drug data in Wikibase has actually already been coded by the coding team at UMC. So basically, it is the perfect training data set for Koda. Also, as Wikibase is basically refilled for each and every day, we automatically get new training data, which we could use to optimize Koda for each and every version of Koda. To be honest and frank, from the very beginning, we thought that technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of those buzzwords would be able to solve a large part of the drug coding dilemma. However, we quickly realized that this was not the case. It's not that easy. And I really want to stress that one important thing we learned with developing Koda is that technology itself does never solve issues. What solves issues is how technology is being applied and used. In our experience, this meant that the key success factor for us to make use of our and WHODrug users' experience was to build that into and think of that when also applying the machine learning techniques. So basically, we developed WHODrug Koda to making sure that it has the built-in coding rules that was based on the latest regulatory expectations and best practices. And when it comes to coding rules, we both have systemic coding rules, which are static rules that can be regarded as foundational for all WHODrug use cases. In addition, we've also identified a few rules that we call dynamic, and these rules can be turned on or off dependent on internal coding conventions, for example. Something else we included in Koda was a quite advanced setup of spell checks and algorithms to help Koda identify key components of the raw data provided to Koda. So on this slide, you'll see a few examples of drug verbatims, and you'll see that they contain quite a lot of information in different orders and so on. So of course, making sense of the data is key to make wise predictions or to expect wise predictions. I would say that maybe the most important piece of Koda's intelligence, if you'd like, originates from WHODrug expertise, from pharmacists and medical expertise at the UMC who are working day in and day out, maintaining and developing WHODrug on a full-time basis, but also making use of the intelligence of the WHODrug users, which we have in our network and that are working worldwide, of course. There's also a direct feedback loop which users of Koda can use to influence coding predictions. This feedback functionality is available for all WHODrug Koda users and allow users to show us potential prediction errors. This feedback is then made available to the Koda maintenance team at the UMC, which then validates the feedback and retrains Koda accordingly. And this is something that is available both in the web application, but also in the Koda API. So now you know quite a lot about WHODrug Koda and how it works, but how about the performance, you might ask? So let's have a look at some results. So first of all, a disclaimer. It's really important that there are not any absolute results. Of course, the results will vary according to the data you will feed WHODrug Koda with and how many of the free input parameters that you provide Koda with and have. But with that said, we have seen quite a few big batches of data from various external sources being run in Koda now, and there are pretty much consistent results on standard data. We're going to start with the efficiency, that is the percentage of the terms that WHODrug Koda can actually code for you. So for the drug name coding, Koda codes around 95% of all drug names, 80% of which are high certainty predictions, and with an additional 15% lower certainty predictions. And for around 5% of the data, WHODrug Koda cannot code that, so that is left to the manual coding teams to handle. If we then look at the ATC selection, WHODrug Koda can successfully and confidently select ATC codes for around 80% of the coded drug names, with an additional 20% selected with lower certainty. Please note that Koda always provides at least one lower certainty ATC selection as long as indication information is provided. So if you do not provide indication information, you will of course see a lower percentage here. So I think that this is good, but to me, what's really important, and for us when developing WHODrug Koda, what has been really important is to look at the consistency and the quality of the coding, the precision, if you like. So how often is WHODrug Koda right versus wrong, basically? When we have manually evaluated this for Koda, we've seen that Koda is correct in more than 99% of all cases for both ATC selection and drug name coding. We've also seen that Koda actually makes mistakes just as often or even more rarely than human coding teams when we have compared coding to manual coding teams, which to me is very promising and something that shows that we're on the right track here. This was just a very brief explanation about some of the results that you can expect. I would also like to, if you would like to dig into specifics of what you can expect with Koda in terms of results, I would encourage you to follow this link that's available on this slide, which will lead you to a case study describing an evaluation of Koda from Novo Nordisk. Finally, from my side, how can WHODrug Koda be accessed? The service of WHODrug Koda is available as both a web application and as an API service, which can be implemented directly to your existing coding tool or similar. So our vision is that a web application might be helpful for evaluations of WHODrug Koda, or if you are coding in really small scale. So for example, if you're a small CRO running a small set of conmeds for a phase 1 clinical trial. While if you're planning to code larger amounts of data, UMC strongly recommends you to make use of the Koda API in your workflow. For example, by making use of Koda within your coding tool. And this is something that we'll hear more from Cass about, how Perficient has taken this on and their experiences with this. So talking about Perficient, I just wanted to explain a bit about the kind of collaboration that we, the UMC, have with Perficient. So first of all, of course, Perficient is licensed and approved by the UMC for working with WHODrug Koda and providing their implementation services into medical coding tools. This basically means that they have all information about Koda, how the API works, they have validation information, test keys and all of that. And of course, we are also supporting our Perficient colleagues with all the support they need in regards to their work with Koda from the tech side. So if you have general questions about WHODrug Koda, then I would advise you to get in touch with us at the UMC. And if you have questions about Perficient services and how to implement Koda into your workflow, then of course I would encourage you to contact Perficient for questions about their services. And for us, collaborations with Perficient and more vendors and implementation partners, they are extremely important. And I really want to thank Perficient for hosting this session and also for a fruitful collaboration so far. And of course, thanks for having me today in this webinar. With that, Cass, I think it's high time for you to speak on Perficient and the services that you can provide.
Thank you very much, Damon. Can you just confirm you can see my slides for me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. So as you've heard, Koda could help you with your daily drug coding business, but it could also help recode data when upgrading your WHODrug dictionary version or even your WHODrug format. So for example, if you're recoding a study from the WHODrug format B2 to B3, a large number of terms may no longer code. So we feel that submitting those terms to WHODrug Koda could dramatically reduce the manual effort of recoding. That's a key area where we think Koda could be beneficial. And you've heard from Damon about the training of Koda and the use of WHODrug for that. One of the main challenges that we've experienced in the use of artificial intelligence in medical coding is the significant time, effort, and volume of data that's required in order to train an AI system. And with WHODrug Koda, that training has already been done for you. So that's a key benefit of Koda itself. So hopefully the reasons why you might want to use Koda are very clear to you now, and the functions that it could deliver. You've also heard from Damon that there are two ways of using Koda. So there's the manual approach of uploading and downloading data through the user interface on the UMC website. But it's also possible to fully integrate Koda into your system using the Koda Web Service Application Programming Interface, or API. We've probably all heard of web APIs, but using web service APIs is not always straightforward. There are technicalities to deal with, like transforming data, generating network traffic, handling security certificates, things like that. So such an integration would be simplified if you have an additional interface level available, and that hides all these technical parts I just described. And some of my colleagues, Christoph Breeden and Matt Weddle, have built a prototype of such an interface, which is what I'm going to talk a bit more about today. So I'll give you an overview of the design, the usage, and possible integration of the interface. And then, of course, you can contact us further if you're interested and have further questions. In order to build such an interface, we of course needed to select a platform to use. We've chosen Oracle. It's kind of an arbitrary choice. You could of course build a similar interface on any other platform. And our prototype consists of a table which contains the drug data that's to be coded, and that therefore mimics the source system, which might be a medical coding system or a pharmacovigilance system, for example. So that table of drug data to be coded is one part of the prototype, and then we have added some programming objects in PL/SQL, which then interact with the web service API right out of the database. The system requirements are Oracle version 11 or higher. You'd need to have UMC certificates installed and an open network connection from your database server to the UMC server. No other infrastructure would be required to make this work. But in addition to the interface that we're prototyping, a custom adapter would be required for each source system. And of course, there would be configurations required within the adapter and the interface in order to ensure that it's meeting your coding needs for your company, whether you code at the term level or the record level, things like that. There are lots of areas that need to be considered that we could work through with you if you were interested in going ahead with this interface. So I'll now describe the workflow as we see it. On the left-hand side, we have a representation of the source system. So this will be at your company. As I said earlier, it could be a medical coding system, it could be a data management system, a pharmacovigilance system, whatever, the system contains drugs that need to be coded. So then that system or application would send the drugs to be coded via the custom adapter into the WHODrug Koda interface. What the interface does is that it converts the data into the format that is expected by the Koda application, and then it calls the Koda Web Service API. So basically passes those drugs along to Koda. Koda then works its magic, as Damon was just describing, so uses the machine learning and all the functionality within that coding engine to propose a potential coding, an encoded drug back to you, or a suggested drug. The interface receives that response back from Koda, passes the response, and then would update the drug data with the coding information in the source system. So that encoded drug or suggested drug is then passed back through the interface, through the adapter, and to your source system. Now, it might sound like quite a few steps, but obviously the point of this is that you can trigger this to be an automated process. So you could decide that you want the process to run once an hour, 3 times a day, or whatever, or every time that the table of drugs in the source system is updated. Again, these would be things that would need to be configured and worked out with you. But the idea is that this hides all of the technical complicated parts from the end user and also from the end application. So it doesn't matter what system you've got, theoretically, it could be set up to work this way. Damon already briefly described some examples of how this could work, but we've got some more examples to describe here. The blue columns of data, so this is just a table to represent exchange of data with Koda. And the blue columns reflect the data that's actually exchanged with Koda. So initially you have a drug table which contains drug verbatims, and some of them may have a route and some of them may have an indication as well as a route. But what you want, of course, is a drug code and an ATC code to come back from Koda if you're choosing to have ATC coding. You'll see we have various types of scenarios represented here. So line 1, we have paracetamol, which just has one ATC code. We've used aspirin as an example because there are 4 ATC codes for aspirin from 4 different classes, depending on the indication for which aspirin is being prescribed. And there are various other scenarios here, non-unique names, non-existing entries, that kind of thing. So we'll come back, well, I'll show you how the data here would be passed through Koda and back again, and we can see the results that came back from Koda. And this is based on our internal testing of Koda itself. So we've challenged it to various scenarios to see how it copes, basically. So when you, as I was saying earlier, what the interface does is transform the data to be coded into the format that Koda is expecting. It then builds the network connection to send the data to Koda, receives a response back from Koda, passes the response, and then puts that coding information back into the source table. This is all the stuff that nobody really wants to have to deal with. This is what it would look like from a programming perspective. So this is why, again, why we think this interface could be beneficial, because it handles all of these aspects for you. So once the data has been exchanged with Koda, Koda's given the results back. These are some of the results that we have seen. So the interface has updated the code and the ATC code column with some values. What you see here is only the encoded information, and the comments column we've used to show some of the suggested drugs that come back from Koda. So what Darman showed you earlier was a screenshot of the Koda user interface. This is representative here. It's not actually what the interface looks like, but it's to show what's happened with these particular examples. So the first one, paracetamol, it's been correctly coded to its drug code and ATC code, even though no indication was provided, and that's because paracetamol only has one ATC code. So that ATC code can be provided even though there's no indication. Lines 2 through to 6 on this table are for aspirin. As I said, 4 ATC codes from 4 different classes, so it's quite a distinct drug. And you'll see where the indication has been spelt correctly, then the drug code and the ATC code is always correct. Whereas if the indication has been misspelt, for example, in line 4, then the ATC code is incorrect. Then in this table, in lines 7 through to 11, we've got some examples of non-unique drugs, non-existing names, umbrella terms, or drugs with multiple ATC codes in the same class. And you can see the results here, and as we described earlier, we can share these slides with you, so you can consider the implication of what you see here. But in summary, all the codes which were provided by Koda were as expected and were correct. And also there was in some scenarios suggested information came back from Koda as we'd expect to see. Then in lines 12 through to 14, you see an example of how you could use Koda for a WHODrug version or WHODrug format upgrade. The trade name Sedkur was not unique in a previous WHODrug version, was non-unique. And then it became unique in a more recent WHODrug version. And so, as I say, this is an example of how using Koda could help you with upversioning to new WHODrug dictionaries or formats, because Koda was able to correctly encode or suggest the code from the current WHODrug version, as long as you pass the trade name to it with the ingredients attached in the way that it was stored in the previous WHODrug version. So you see, as I say, lines 12 through to 14, various scenarios there. If you see in line 13, Sedkur with salicylic acid in square brackets, that's how it appeared in an old WHODrug version, and it's been correctly recognized by Koda and a code returned, even though the way it's stored in the dictionary has changed. So I appreciate there's a lot of information on this slide, and it might need some rereading in order to fully comprehend what we're trying to demonstrate here. But the concept is that we challenged Koda with various scenarios, and the results came back as expected. The results came back correctly. What we envisage is that this interface or something like it could be used, well, in the prototype that we've developed, it's Oracle based, so it could be potentially could be integrated with any Oracle based system such as Argus Safety, where it could be used for coding during case entry or during the case save procedures. Alternatively, Koda could be integrated into Oracle TMS, the medical coding system, where automatically created non-approved VTAs for coding emissions could be sent to Koda, and then Koda could return a code. So these are just some Oracle-based examples. As I said earlier, the prototype is currently Oracle-based, but we could certainly explore using other platforms. So I don't want anyone to have the impression that this would only work if you use Argus or use TMS. We chose Oracle just as an example on which to base a prototype. So thank you very much for attending. Thanks for your time and attention, and we'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any at this stage. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So as a reminder, you're welcome to submit your questions via the questions feature, and we'll answer them as we go. The first question that we have today is, do you have two processes of auto coding and coding with Koda before manual coding happens?
Sorry, Eugene, can you just read that question again?
Yeah, and feel free, well, you may not be able to see the questions, but it's, do you have two processes of auto coding and coding with Koda before manual coding happens?
Matt, feel free to chip in here if you disagree with what I'm saying or want to add some more to it. Sorry, go on.
So I guess the question is whether there's an auto coding process and then you simply send any coding omissions to Koda as the second step. So it's not that there's no auto coding process involved, and the answer is yes, that is how we would envisage this to work, that you would auto code data coming in as normal, and then if there are emissions created, coding emissions, then those would be sent to Koda. And then the final step would be anything which Koda couldn't handle. Those would need to be coded manually in the normal way.
So depending on how people's coding processes are set up, the intention would be that Koda could at least replace some of the manual work of the coding team, hopefully a lot of it. And it might well just be that the human coders would need to review the output from Koda where there's just been a suggested code, or where it can't code anything at all. Of course, that would still need some human review.
Can I just comment on that from the UMC perspective as well?
Sure, please do.
Thank you. Because I think that this is a brilliant question, and just as Matt and Cass explained, Koda is kind of designed to give flexibility to the end user to really customize the use of Koda, so where you want and need WHODrug Koda to fit in. What I would like to say though is that we are, for example, exploring right now the concept of exact matches. So an exact match that a normal autoencoder would kind of code to as a standard scenario, is that always the most appropriate coding? We have seen examples where they're actually an unfortunate misspelling, for example, might lead to an unfortunate exact match autoencoding. So we are looking into this, and we would like to kind of present some results on this as well eventually. But just a heads up that by having something or someone else coding before Koda, then of course you won't take advantage of Koda's know-how for that specific term. So just be aware of that if you're considering doing this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Damon. Next question is, do we have any limitation on the number of terms uploaded to Koda and its processing time?
Darman, I think you'll have to answer that one, please.
Yeah, sure. So regarding limitation, there are no limitations practically set in place from our side, since we know that many organizations, they work with enormous data sets, so no limitations. As regards to the processing time, I don't have the exact figure on that, but Koda can definitely process several hundreds of terms per minute. And Matt or Cass, I don't know if you want to comment something on the capacity of your bridge to Koda, so to speak.
Yeah, again, there's no theoretical limit, but there are obviously practical limits of bulk transactions. Obviously, if you're talking about hundreds of thousands of records, there is obviously a time. The more records you're coding at once, the greater the time. But there's no theoretical limit. There's no imposed limit in the solution that we're envisaging.
Great, thank you. And the next question is there a way to manually review the Koda listings with assigned codes?
Yeah, so the Koda results would be sent back into your source system. And so yes, that you would certainly review the results that Koda provides. And then depending on what your coding system is, you would then choose whether or not you want to accept those results or overwrite them if for some reason you disagreed, or like, for example, if the indication was misspelt and therefore the ATC code was misassigned. Great,
thank you. And by the way, I apologize for not introducing Matt Weddle, who's on the call. He's a solutions architect at Perficient. So the next question is, how different is Koda from the synonym list which we use?
Synonym lists would be company specific. So I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question. Darman or Matt, could you comment?
Sure. I think that it's a brilliant question, and this is something that we're really trying to explain all the time, basically, since Koda is something new. So I would say that the main difference is that a synonym list is static, while the coding provided by Koda is dynamic. And what I mean by that is that a synonym list, most often what you would have is a defined set of data that is being coded to a defined WHODrug term. So if there is a new alteration, for example, a strange misspelling, if the information is in another order, then your synonym list would not pick that up. The whole idea with Koda is to get away from that. So remember that Koda is using machine learning and AI, and what that means is that you're kind of getting an intelligent coder that does not have to have seen specific data set or specific data parameters to make coding calls. It should be able to deal with those anyway, despite not seeing that specific combination of verbatim, route, and indication, for example. Another thing to think of here is that a synonym list, whenever there is a new version out of WHODrug Global, for example, what's your current processes? Do you up version your synonym lists? How much time do you spend on that? Remember that Koda is trained and updated by us, the UMC, so you don't really need to do anything like that with Koda. So there's nothing to up version and so on. That's the other thing that comes to my mind. Matt, any additional comments?
Yeah, just to emphasize that the biggest issues that we've seen when using AI with coding, not just drug coding, but all medical coding, is the overhead in training the system, and also the subsequent dips in coding accuracy when the dictionary itself is upgraded, which for WHODrug is twice per year. We generally see a temporary dip in the AI performance. And the fact that Koda has already done the training for you, and on a much bigger scale than most companies could use, because they have the big database for training, we anticipate that you wouldn't see such dips in performance.
Great, thank you. The next question is, what would the steps be after dictionary upgrades? Would the fallouts first go into Koda and then the remaining terms sent for manual coding?
The short answer is yes. Yeah, that would be the way we envisage using it anyway. So to get the most out of Koda, as Damon was saying earlier, I think you need to get the most out of it. You need to let Koda handle things for you, and then just only have the human intervention for anything that it can't handle. So, if you could have your auto coding take place in your usual medical coding system, or whichever system it takes place in, and then terms only be sent to Koda if you can't handle them by the auto coding methods, then yes, that Koda should be able to deal with most terms, and then the remaining terms be sent for manual coding. Yes.
Next question is, currently we do not perform ATC specific coding. Is there a way to inactivate the ATC retrieval function?
Yeah, ATC coding is optional with Koda, isn't it, Damon?
Yes, exactly.
Great. Next question is, does Koda always use the recent version of the dictionary? And if we are using old dictionaries, how does it work?
That one needs to come to you as well, I'm afraid, Damon.
No worries. Actually, you could use Koda with basically any dictionary version of WHODrug. So right now we've uploaded versions since I think 2017, but they are basically not an issue for us. It's just a matter of doing it, making sure that version of WHODrug Global is available, or even WHODrug Enhanced or WHODrug Enhanced with Herbal, which are previous versions or types of WHODrug, I should say. So you should be able to use Koda with any dictionary version, still using the latest version of the Koda coding, so to speak. So you would get the benefits of you using an up-to-date coder virtual coder, but you can use an older version.
So the dictionary version to be used would be something that we'd have to set up in the interface, wouldn't it, or configure somehow?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. It's available within the API information, so you could define that when you send a call to Koda, basically.
Yeah, so we would pass the dictionary version number through as part of the message to Koda.
Okay. Next question is, will this interface only work with Oracle-based systems?
No, we designed the interface prototype using Oracle because Oracle is something we work with all the time. But in theory, the interface could receive data from any source system via the custom adapter. So it's the adapter's role to populate the tables used by the interface. And then subsequently, once the interface has received the coding results from the WHODrug Koda, the adapter returns the codes to the source system. So even if the interface is Oracle-based, the source system does not need to be.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have any more questions at the moment, but we can give it another 30 seconds to see if there's one more that we can answer. In the meantime, as you see, Caroline and Damon's contact information is on the screen. You're welcome to email them directly if you have any additional questions. And at this point, I think we could wrap it up. So again, thank you to Damon for presenting today, and we appreciate the partnership. And again, if anyone has questions, feel free to reach out. We appreciate everyone joining today, and we hope that everyone has a great rest of the day and evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.